Are you looking to 6-speed swap your E36? Well, in this video, I'm going to go through all the parts that we've gathered to do the 6-speed swap in our E36 drift car and give you a rough idea of how much it's all going to cost you. So stay tuned. So we currently have a Getrag 220G in the car. It's been a great gearbox. They are known to be pretty weak, but we are going to be moving up to a considerably bigger box, obviously 6-speed. So we're gonna go with a GS6-37DZ. So that's out of a newer like 1/3 series. It's obviously a diesel box. So it's out of a diesel car and pretty much bolts straight up to any M5X engine. And it's a good swap that quite a lot of people are doing. It's gathering quite a bit of traction. So I'm gonna run through basically why we chose the DZ, and then we'll go into all the parts and stuff. So you might be wondering why we're gonna go with a DZ gearbox conversion. So there are quite a few 6-speeds that can fit behind a M5X engine, but we've decided to go to this one for a few reasons. The first one being the car itself. I believe it's got a 315 diff in the back. And it's probably just a little bit too tall for my liking. I like a little bit more wheel torque, so I wanted to swap out the ratio of the car. Unfortunately in Australia, to get those higher diff ratios, it's really expensive. We've already welded a diff, so it's gonna be a pain in the ass to change that over. We need to re-weld the diff and all that stuff, so it's kind of a bit annoying. We have sort of had a band-aid solution of just running smaller wheels and tires. So we're running 15s with a 195/45 tire. So that's given us about 10 to 12% more wheel torque, which has been good. The car definitely rips on those, but the tires are actually pretty expensive. They're almost double what a normal 15, 16-inch tire is. So it's not really a permanent solution. So with the DZ box, the first gear ratio is pretty much a lot bigger. I think it's 20%. The second gear ratio is about 10%, and third is about 5% shorter. So it's going to give us a lot more torque in those lower RPM ranges, pretty much on par with what the smaller wheels did. And also it's got the overdrive of the 6th gear. So it's even better than changing the final drive ratio, because we still have that 6th gear if we're driving to events on the highway. We're not going to have the car screaming at, 5,000 RPM just to cruise on the highway. It's going to be in a nice, easy RPM and really nice on the car, and obviously helps with obviously fuel as well. So yeah, the diesel box, as I mentioned, is out of a diesel 1/3 series, or maybe even 5 series. Quite a few cars. They're known to be very, very strong, obviously out of a diesel engine that makes quite a bit of torque. So it's going to be more than strong enough to handle a couple clutch kicks here and there. Who knows, the engine's boosted later in the future. We're basically going to be able to have a bulletproof drivetrain already. We won't have to mess around and deal with breaking gearboxes and that sort of thing. Specifically in Australia here, the common swap, if you wanted a stronger gearbox, would be the ZF 5-speed. Unfortunately, they're getting pretty expensive. You can pretty much do this entire swap for the cost of one ZF 5-speed gearbox. I've known of people that basically swap out the 5-speed into a 6-speed and end up making money because of just the difference in price. So it's definitely one thing to consider. Another reason as well is the gearbox is still relatively cheap for being a 6-speed. It's basically as cheap as a ZF 5-speed, but obviously it's got that 6th gear. And even if you did want to move up to a 420G, which is the transmission out of an E36 M3, which is what we have in our boosted E46, you're looking upwards of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, which is insane. They are really good gearboxes and they're really strong, but just the price just isn't at the right price point to be able to put it in our drift car. It's still a relatively budget build. So yeah, that's why I've decided to go with the DZ box. So I'm now just going to run through all the parts that we've collected to do the swap on our car. Pretty much will be the same if you have a ZF or a Getrag gearbox. If the car is already manual, obviously, if it isn't, you need to do a manual swap on top of that. But yeah, I'm just gonna run through all the parts for our car. It's obviously already got that Getrag in it. It's already manual, so not that many parts that you're gonna need. So the first part that we needed to get was a new clutch disc. So this is a Clutch Max kit. It's pretty much a 6-puck disc, as you can see. The reason being is the input shaft is different. I believe it's a 22 spline. The one we have is a 10 spline. So the gearbox input shaft is different. So you need to get a new clutch disc. Because we're running the same brand clutch kit and clutch disc. We don't need to get a whole new pressure plate or new flywheel. It should just bolt up and be a direct swap. Ideally, you'd like to get a sprung hub disc, just because this is pretty aggressive for the street. We still drive the car on the street sometimes, but they don't actually make a 6-puck in the sprung center. So we're just going with this one. It's the same one that's on the car. It's okay to drive on the street. You just have to be really, really careful. It's obviously extremely easy to stall, but it's definitely a very aggressive clutch, which is what we want for drifting. So we've been doing lots of clutch kicks and that sort of thing. So the next part that you're gonna need is a input shaft extender. As the name suggests, it basically slides on the input shaft. There's a couple grub screws there that you screw down and Loctite, and then that extends the input shaft of the gearbox, so it slides into the throw-up bearing, which obviously is attached to the flywheel. So the kit comes with a new throw-up bearing in here. So that's specific for this part here, and obviously the flywheel we're using. So it should just all work. This is actually from BCP Creations. I'll leave a link to them down below. If you do want to pick up a set, you can pick up it through Gresham Performance. He'll be able to sort you out. So the next part you're going to need is a new guibo. That's the one that came with the gearbox. We got a fresh one just because they are a pretty common part to fail. So you're going to need a new one of these because the gearbox on the Getrag is the smaller diameter one. So this is the much larger one. We've actually gone with a E36 M3 one. It's actually a little bit thicker than the stock one. I'll try to line them up there. You can see it's apparently about 8 to 9 mils thicker, which just should give it a little bit more strength. Obviously when we're clutch kicking and that sort of thing, we don't really want this to fail, but it's obviously an extremely important part to have in the drive line. We don't want to be deleting this for like a solid piece. But yeah, so you can pick up an E36 M3 one if you want to go a bit stronger, if you're drifting the car, but if it's just like a streeter, you can probably just get away with a normal larger size guibo. Also, the other part you're going to need is a new front section of the drive shaft. So this is actually the automatic front section of the drive shaft, because it has the larger guibo diameter. So this should hopefully fit in. It does. All the holes line up, so we're all good. So the Getrag drive shaft front section will not work because obviously it has the smaller guibo. So you'll need to pick up an automatic one and then have it extended. I'm not entirely sure how much it has to be extended by, because this is obviously the automatic one, so it's different to the manual or ZF style one. So you will need to measure it. We'll get the engine in the car and we'll measure it ourselves, and then we'll take it to a drive shaft shop and get them to extend it. Another piece that we are going to be replacing is this locking collar. You can see in there the rubber is completely gone. Here's what a new one should look like. Obviously it's got that yellow rubbery piece inside. But yeah, here's the piece. It's just like a rubbery splined piece that basically just tightens on the drive shaft. Helps lock the drive shaft in and avoid any unnecessary vibrations. So definitely a little piece that you want to replace while you're there. You don't really want the drive shaft hobbling around, that sort of thing, and creating vibrations. Can mess up your center support bearing, can mess up your guibo, so definitely not a good thing, and it's a relatively cheap part to replace. While we're on the topic of while you're there's, also the center support bearing is a good little thing to do, because you're messing around with the drive shaft, you might as well just press the old one off and put a new one on. You can even just ask the drive shaft shop that's doing the drive shaft just to replace it as well for you. They've obviously got a lot better tooling to be able to do it and smash it out in like 5 minutes. But yeah, definitely a good part to replace while you're there. So yeah, one of the last parts that you're gonna need is a shifter linkage. This is the shifter linkage from an E46. So it's not correct because it doesn't have the right tilt in it. It's a slight tilt on the gearbox, and obviously it's way too long. The DSSR or the shifter linkage ends up being really, really short. You can buy DSSRs or shifter linkages for the swap. They are just a bit expensive, and we're trying to get this done on a little bit of a budget. So we've just decided to have a crack at making our own using this shifter linkage. We'll see how we go. You can also opt for a DSSR or a dual shear selector rod. I don't really think that that's necessary. I think you get the same effect if you shim the stock style one with the clips on one side correctly with the shims that you just get from BMW. So if you shim it up correctly, I'm pretty confident we can get a nice tight feeling selector. So the last part that you're gonna need that is not here is a new gearbox cross member, which obviously sits like so on the gearbox. So we're actually gonna fabricate our own. So you can just take it to a shop to get done. It's pretty much the only piece of fabrication that you're gonna need to do for the swap. Because the gearbox is on a tilt, it's a little bit of a weird sort of one, and it kind of just looks a bit strange, but you can just pretty much fabricate one with just a bit of bar, and then yeah, just go from there. Now, you might be wondering, how much is this all gonna cost me? Well, I'll give you the basic rundown of what we've spent or what you can expect to spend. So the gearbox itself, probably looking at spending about 1,500 to 2 grand for one of these. Have a look around, you can definitely find them for a lot cheaper than that. Just gotta be patient, find a deal on Marketplace, that sort of thing. The clutch disc itself was $180. The input shaft adapter kit was $120. The guibo was $160. The drive shaft, we're gonna allocate $200 to modifying that. The drive shaft collar was $27. The shifter linkage was $60. And the cross member, probably expect to pay $200 to $400 for one of those, just depending on where you go. If you can get a mate to do it for mates rates, obviously it's gonna be a lot cheaper, but we're just gonna be allocating about $200 to $400 for that. So all that came to a grand total of $2,547. That is in kangaroo money, so Australian dollars, which seems a little bit pricey, but when you think the Getrag or ZF that you already have in your car could be worth maybe $500 to $700 if it's a Getrag, and $2 to $2.5 grand if it's a ZF, you're pretty much already paying for the entire swap there. And you're getting a much better gearbox. You're getting obviously 6 gears instead of 5, getting a stronger gearbox, that sort of thing. And hopefully you'll be saving a lot of money when you don't have to buy, 3 Getrags because you keep breaking them. So yeah, that's all from me. Just wanted to give you guys a quick rundown on the parts that we've acquired to do the swap and also how much we've spent. The plan for the gearbox swap, which obviously will start in the next video, is going to be to actually pull the engine of the car. You can do the gearbox swap just by dropping the gearbox and keeping the engine in the car. There's just a couple gaskets and stuff that we want to do with the engine out of the car. So I figured we'd just pull the engine, address those other minor issues, and then we can just put it back in. It's obviously a lot easier to show you what's happening with the engine and gearbox out of the car rather than trying to be under the car and all that sort of stuff. So in the next video, we're going to be pulling the engine on the E36, and then we'll get to work with swapping the gearbox and obviously addressing those gaskets and various bits and bobs. So yeah, that's all from me. If you did get any value out of the video, don't forget to chuck it a like, chuck me a subscribe. It's literally free and helps me out so much. So thanks for doing that, guys. If you have any further questions or queries, just chuck me a comment below. I'll be sure to help you out best I can. But yeah, I'm really keen to get started on the swap, so you'll see that in the next video. That's all from me. Peace.